My name is Hannah Mercer, and I'm 34 years old. A month ago, I stood in the middle of a dusty parking lot behind my apartment building, holding a single suitcase, watching my phone screen light up with messages I would never answer again. My mother's final words to me before I walked out of her house still echoed in my ears. "You're being selfish, Hannah. You're throwing your family away." What she didn't know, what none of them ever bothered to understand, was that I wasn't walking away from family. I was walking away from a lifetime of quiet erasure, from people who used love like currency and withdrew it every time I said no. That day, I didn't lose a family. I found the space to finally build my own. If you've ever been called ungrateful for asking to be treated with respect, or selfish for needing boundaries, then you know how twisted love can get in the wrong hands. And if you've ever sat alone in a silent room, wondering if maybe they were right and you really were the problem, then this story is for you. Please tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Let me know if you've ever had to choose between loyalty and survival. And hit the like button if you've ever dared to redefine what family really means. Before I tell you what happened the day I walked away, I need to go back. I need to show you the slow, subtle ways people can drain the life out of you while smiling sweetly across a dinner table. I need to show you what it felt like growing up in a house where I was always a guest, never a daughter. I grew up in a beige ranch house on the outskirts of Albany, New York, the kind of place where every house looks the same from the street: neatly trimmed lawns, wind chimes whispering in the breeze, a row of tulips in the front yard that never quite survived past spring. My father, Harold, was a high school history teacher with a short temper and a collection of war memorabilia he polished more than he spoke to me. My mother, Denise, ran a craft supply business out of the garage and always smelled like cinnamon and wood glue. They had my older brother, Jason, 5 years before I came along, and by the time I arrived, it seemed like their patience and their curiosity had already run out. Jason was everything they wanted: athletic, charming, naturally gifted at just about anything he tried. He played baseball and soccer, was voted homecoming king his senior year, and never got anything less than AB without a compelling excuse and a plan to fix it. My mother called him her golden boy, as a nickname she used without irony even when he was 27 and racking up gambling debt. I was the second child, the unexpected one, the quiet little shadow, as my dad liked to say. Not in a sweet way. In the kind of way that told you your presence was more of a background nuisance than a part of the picture. I didn't realize until much later that I was already building the habits of a ghost, keeping my voice soft, stepping around conflict like broken glass, offering myself up in little ways just to avoid the heavy silences that came after I dared to need something. When Jason got into his first car accident at 17, my parents paid off the repairs and grounded him for 2 days, then gave him an upgraded stereo for being honest about what happened. When I got a C in geometry, I had my phone taken away for a month and was told I was embarrassing the family. But none of that hurt as much as the silence did. The silences were the worst. They'd start subtly, a tight jaw here, a slightly delayed there, and they'd stretch for hours, sometimes days, when my mother decided I'd done something wrong. She never raised her voice. She just stopped speaking. I'd come home from school, hang on my coat, and call out hello. Nothing. I'd offer to do dishes, clean my room, even apologize for whatever imaginary crime I'd committed that day. Still nothing. Then, without warning, she'd start talking to me again, like nothing had happened. No explanation. No forgiveness. Just the cold reassurance that her love was not a given. And so I adapted. I became the family photographer at holidays, the errand runner, the quiet one who could be counted on to remember everyone's birthdays, but never expected anyone to remember mine. I baked cakes for Jason's friends on their birthdays, cleaned up after our family dog without being asked, and memorized my mom's favorite coffee order, just so I could surprise her sometimes, praying it might earn me a smile that lasted longer than a second. I told myself that was love. In high school, I discovered a love for drawing and painting, spending hours with charcoal and sketch pads in my room. I wasn't brilliant, but I was passionate. When I told my parents I wanted to apply to art school, my father didn't even look up from the newspaper. "You'll starve," he muttered. My mother just sighed and said, "Be serious, Hannah." I wasn't surprised. Not really. But a part of me cracked anyway. I switched my major to communications when I started at SUNY Binghamton. It sounded practical, respectable, something they could be proud of. Something Jason wouldn't laugh at. By then, he was already out in the world failing upwards, taking temp jobs he always seemed to quit before the 90-day mark, crashing at different apartments, spinning the same story about how corporate life just wasn't for him. Every time he came back to the house, my parents greeted him like royalty, kisses on the cheek, hot meals, questions about what he needed. I once came home from a 3-day school trip with a fever of 102 and had to make my own soup. Jason got strep throat, and my mom took a week off work to nurse him back to health. Still, I kept trying. I believed, in the way children believe in fairy tales, that one day they'd see me. Not just tolerate me, not just respond when I spoke, but really see me. One Christmas, I saved up for months to buy my mom a set of handmade ceramic mixing bowls I'd seen her admire at a local craft fair. I wrapped them carefully, even included a little card with a watercolor sketch of our family dog inside. She opened them, smiled politely, and said, "Oh, that's sweet. But you know I prefer glass." Jason gave her a bottle of perfume he picked up from a Walgreens on the way over, and she nearly cried. It wasn't until I moved out at 22 and got my own tiny studio apartment that I started to breathe like a person instead of a placeholder. I got a job doing social media for a nonprofit arts group, spent my weekends sketching in the park, and started dating a guy named Ben who told me I was the first woman he'd met who made him feel calm just by being near. I didn't know how to take that as a compliment. I was so used to being invisible that the idea of someone finding peace in my presence felt suspicious, even dangerous. Like maybe I was a mirror, not a person. Maybe I was just showing him what he wanted to see. I kept in touch with my parents, of course. Weekly phone calls that mostly consisted of my mom giving me updates on Jason's latest exploits and my dad chiming in only to ask if I'd remembered to change my car's oil. I'd mention things about work, sometimes my art, occasionally Ben, but their interest always felt forced, like they were fulfilling an obligation rather than sharing in my life. Still, I showed up for every holiday, smiled through every passive-aggressive comment about, "When are you going to give us grandkids?" and "Your hair looked better last time," and tried to ignore the growing sense that I was an actor in someone else's play. Then, 2 years ago, something shifted. Jason came back home again, this time with a girlfriend named Kelsey and a baby on the way. My parents were ecstatic. My mom immediately started redecorating the guest room into a nursery, calling it a family investment. I offered to help, thinking maybe this could be a chance to reconnect. But she brushed me off. "You don't have children, Hannah. You wouldn't understand." That sentence burned. As if being childless made me unqualified to contribute, to care, to matter. That was the beginning of the end. Though I didn't know it yet. Let me know in the comments if this is resonating so far, or if you've ever been told you were too sensitive for noticing the ways people hurt you. When Kelsey gave birth to their son, Aiden, the entire household shifted like a new planet had entered orbit. My mother, once stoic and calculating, transformed into someone else entirely, fawning, maternal, giddy in ways I had never seen, not even in the blurred photos of my own childhood. She posted pictures online almost daily. Aiden's first bath, Aiden's first yawn. Aiden wearing a pumpkin hat for Halloween. Her captions were glowing tributes, not just to her grandson, but to the new life she'd claimed through him. "There is nothing like the love of a grandchild," she wrote once, under a photo of Aiden asleep on her shoulder. Not a single mention of her daughter. Not a word about the child she'd already raised, or the years I'd spent trying to be good enough for a tenth of that affection. I showed up to meet Aiden at their house one chilly Sunday in November. My mother barely greeted me, just waved me inside while still cradling the baby like he was made of glass. Jason stood at the kitchen island, eating directly from a box of cereal like it was his personal pantry. Kelsey was upstairs napping, apparently exhausted from the week. "We're trying to help her ease into things," my mom explained, rocking the baby gently. "Postpartum is no joke." I agreed, of course. Said all the right things. I asked if I could hold him, and she hesitated. Not outright refusing, but her body stiffened in that familiar way that said she didn't trust me. "Maybe later," she murmured, eyes still fixed on the tiny bundle in her arms. I stood there in my own parents' living room, surrounded by the warmth of their new beginning, and felt like a cold breeze had followed me in. I sat on the couch and watched as Jason came over and kissed Mom's cheek. "You're a natural," he grinned. She laughed softly and said, "Well, I've done it before." Except she hadn't. Not like this. In the weeks that followed, every phone call became a monologue about Aiden's bowel movements, Kelsey's breastfeeding journey, Jason's job search. When I mentioned I'd been promoted to creative director at the nonprofit, my mother barely paused before pivoting back to the color of Aiden's nursery. "We went with soft sage," she said, "something neutral and calming." "Isn't that sweet?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, and then hung up 20 minutes later without once hearing her ask how I was doing. It was like the promotion had never been mentioned. I tried to pretend it didn't bother me. I told myself I was happy for them. I even offered to babysit once or twice, though each time I was met with some version of, "We've got it under control, but thanks." My father was quieter than ever. When I saw him, he was usually tinkering in the garage, talking about car repairs or half-watching baseball. I asked him once, lightly, if he thought they were getting a little obsessive over the baby. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "They're just excited. Why can't you be?" And that, right there, that was the crack that let the flood in. It wasn't that I was jealous of a baby. It wasn't even about Jason, who had always floated through life like gravity didn't apply. It was about the way my parents, who had always treated me like a side character in their family narrative, now acted like this new chapter erased all the earlier ones. Like my story didn't matter. Like I had never existed at all. Christmas that year was unbearable. They insisted the whole family gather at their house, and I, like a fool, agreed. I bought gifts for everyone, even for Kelsey, who had never spoken to me for more than 5 minutes at a time. I wrapped them carefully and labeled them in gold ink. When I arrived, I found that the tree was overloaded with presents, but none with my name on them. Not one. At first, I assumed they must have been hidden or misplaced, maybe under the tree skirt. But as the morning unfolded, it became clear. They had simply forgotten. Or worse, they hadn't cared to remember. "Oh, I thought we were keeping it simple this year," my mom said casually when I asked if perhaps there had been a mix-up. "You know, with the baby and all, everything's been so hectic. I figured you'd understand." I did. I understood too well. Jason opened a new pair of hiking boots and a designer cologne. Kelsey got a spa gift card and a diamond-studded necklace that used to belong to your grandmother. The baby had an avalanche of toys and outfits and monogrammed bibs. I got a $10 Starbucks card that had clearly come from the kitchen drawer, still curled at the edges from the heat. That night, I sat on the back porch with a mug of cold cider, watching my breath puff out in little white clouds. I remembered Christmases when I was a kid, when I stayed up late helping my mom wrap Jason's gifts while mine were already done. I remembered the year I made her a photo album from all our old vacations, and she never even opened it. And now, here we were, years later, and nothing had changed. Except this time, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. This time, I felt the sting like a slap, not a pinch. Ben tried to comfort me when I got home. He held me while I cried, rubbed my back in slow circles, whispered, "You don't deserve that, Hannah." I knew he meant it, but even his voice couldn't soften the ache that had taken root in my chest. I didn't feel angry. I felt hollow, like something inside me had been scooped out and discarded long ago, and now I was finally noticing the space it left behind. For the next few months, I pulled away quietly. I stopped calling as often. I declined dinner invites. I let texts go unanswered. My parents didn't notice, or if they did, they didn't mention it. Jason called once to ask if I could help fund a short-term business idea he was pitching. "It's just a small investment," he said. "You've always been good with money." I told him no, and he never called again. I thought maybe that would be the end, that I could fade out peacefully, without confrontation. But then, in early March, my mother called out of the blue and asked if I could come by the house that weekend. "We want to talk about something important," she said. "Jason and Kelsey have a plan, and I think it could involve you." I should have said no. I should have trusted my gut and kept my distance. But some part of me, some desperate, aching part, still hoped that maybe, finally, they wanted to include me. Maybe this was the moment I had waited for my entire life. Maybe I'd been wrong. So I said yes. And I showed up that Saturday afternoon with a box of croissants and a bottle of wine, dressed in my nicest coat, hair neatly pinned, heart cautiously optimistic. I stepped into the house to the familiar scent of cinnamon and pine cleaner, the sound of Aiden cooing from the playpen in the living room. My mother kissed my cheek and took the croissants without a word. Jason gave me a nod. Kelsey barely looked up from her phone. They led me into the dining room, where the table was already set for 4. My mother poured coffee. My father sat silently at the head of the table, arms crossed. Then Jason cleared his throat and said, "So, we've been thinking about the future." I remember every word that came next with crystal clarity. How Jason explained that he and Kelsey were trying to buy a house, but were struggling with the down payment. How my parents had agreed it would make sense for me to move out of my apartment and let them move into it. "It's already family property," my mom said, smiling like she'd just given me a present. "We're all about supporting each other, aren't we?" I blinked. "You want me to give them my apartment?" "Well, my dad cut in. Technically, we helped you with a security deposit, so..." I laughed. I actually laughed, this sharp, incredulous sound that surprised even me. "You've got to be kidding." Jason's face twisted. "Why are you being like this, Hannah? We're talking about helping each other. You don't even use the second bedroom. It's perfect for Aiden." I looked at them, one by one. My father avoiding my eyes. My mother sipping her coffee like it was any other day. Jason, smug and self-assured, as if it had already been decided. And in that moment, something in me snapped, not loudly, not violently, but cleanly. Like a twig underfoot finally breaking after too much weight. I stood up, still calm. "No," I said. "You don't get to ask this of me. You don't get to erase me again." My mother frowned. "Hannah, don't be selfish." There it was. The word. The label they had stitched into my skin since I was old enough to want anything they didn't approve of. "I'm not being selfish," I said, louder now. "I'm just finally done playing small so you can feel comfortable." Then I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I didn't even look back. But I knew, as my boots hit the cold pavement and the wind curled around me like a shiver I didn't shake, that this was the beginning of the end. And the start of something far more honest. The silence lasted 3 days. 3 whole days after I walked out of my parents' house without a backward glance, I heard nothing. No missed calls.
No texts.
Not even a passive-aggressive email, which had been my mother's signature move for years whenever she wanted to scold me, but still pretend she was being measured. It was as if they'd decided I'd made my choice, and so they made theirs. Or maybe they were waiting, expecting me to crawl back like I always had, apologizing for the inconvenience of my boundaries. But I didn't. I didn't call.
I didn't reach out.
I didn't explain. I sat in my apartment, still warm with the scent of the jasmine candle I'd lit that night, and I waited. At first, I felt powerful. I felt the rush of taking my voice back. I even slept soundly for the first 2 nights, dreaming of clean slates and quiet mornings. But by the 3rd night, the silence began to shift. It became heavy, not empowering. It whispered the same old questions I thought I'd buried years ago. What if they're right about you? What if you're the difficult one? The one no one misses when she leaves? I didn't answer those questions. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine, curled up with a sketch pad, and tried to draw the feeling out of my body. I made sharp lines, jagged edges, a storm in ink and charcoal. It didn't fix anything, but it reminded me of who I was outside of them. I was still an artist. I was still a woman who'd climbed her way out of their shadows. That mattered, even if they never said it out loud. The silence finally broke on the 4th morning, around 9 a.m. When I got a text from Jason. Not a greeting.
No apology.
Just a single sentence.
Wow.
You really showed your true colors. I stared at it for a long time, letting the venom seep in. My finger hovered over the keyboard, tempted to respond with every retort that had built up over the years. My true colors? You mean the ones I had to hide to survive you all? But I didn't write any of that. I just blocked his number. Not out of anger, but out of necessity. I needed peace more than I needed the last word. That evening, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice, when I played it back, was syrupy sweet at first, the kind of tone she used when she was still trying to pretend she hadn't done anything wrong. Hi, honey. I just wanted to check in. We're all still a little surprised by your reaction on Saturday, but we know you've always been sensitive.
A pause. A sigh.
Jason's worried about you. So are we. Please don't let a little misunderstanding get blown out of proportion. We love you. Call me back. I didn't. 2 days later, I got another message, and this one wasn't sweet. It was clipped.
Cold.
Since you've made it clear that you want nothing to do with us, we'll respect that. But don't expect us to be here waiting when you change your mind. That one I saved. Not to reread, but to remind myself on the hard days that love with strings is not love at all. It's leverage. It's a leash. For the next 3 weeks, I kept my head down. I worked. I painted. I kept busy. But loneliness has a way of sneaking up on you, even when you know better than to romanticize what you walked away from. I miss the idea of family. I miss the illusion I used to cling to, that maybe, just maybe, one day they'd come around. That if I worked hard enough, loved carefully enough, made myself small enough, they'd meet me halfway. But illusions don't keep you warm at night. Ben tried to fill the silence, but even he had started pulling back. He was kind, gentle, always listening, but I could sense his unease. He didn't know what to do with the new version of me, the woman who no longer swallowed her pain in favor of peace. We had dinner one night, just after my 35th birthday, and I told him about the dream I'd been having, the one where I'm standing in a burning house, calling for someone to help, and no one turns around. He looked at me, his fork paused halfway to his mouth, and said, "Maybe you don't want to be saved. Maybe you just want someone to watch it burn with you." I laughed, bitterly. Maybe I do. And just like that, we started to drift. Not because he was cruel, not because I was broken, but because sometimes when you reclaim your identity, not everyone recognizes you anymore. And that's okay. It was in that space of emptiness, between grief and relief, that I found them. It started with a gallery. A new one had opened just a few blocks from my apartment, tucked between a vegan bakery and an old record store. The place was small, but the front window was full of raw, evocative pieces, bold colors, wild textures, pieces that screamed with emotion. I wandered in one Friday night after work, not expecting anything except a quiet moment with art. But what I found was more than that. It was a community. The gallery's owner, Mia, was in her 40s, a former art therapist who had turned her grief, losing her wife to cancer, into a space for other artists to heal. She greeted me like I was already part of something, handed me a glass of wine, and introduced me to the rest of the group. There was Andre, who sculpted out of salvaged metal. Lila, who painted abstract landscapes of places she dreamed about but had never visited. And Simone, a retired nurse who only ever worked in black and white photography because, as she put it, life's too gray for pastels. I went back the next week, and the one after that. I started bringing my sketches, shyly at first, but they were received with a kind of warmth I'd never known. Not performative, not pitying. Just real. One night, Mia looked at a charcoal portrait I'd done of a woman kneeling in the rain and said, "She looks like she's finally letting herself cry." "She is," I replied. Mia just nodded. "Then she's healing." That was the first time I cried in public in years. Not out of shame, but because for the first time, someone saw not just the product of my pain, but the strength it took to survive it. That group became my lifeline. They didn't care about where I came from, what I'd done, or what I'd walked away from. They just cared that I showed up, that I kept creating, that I kept choosing myself. In May, Mia offered me a wall in their summer showcase. "Just pick your strongest piece," she said. I spent 2 weeks agonizing over it before finally settling on a painting I hadn't shown anyone yet. It was of a woman standing on a shoreline, wind tearing at her coat, waves rising behind her. Her face wasn't fully defined, neither angry nor calm, just free. I called it departure. Opening night came, and I stood in the back corner, nursing a glass of wine, watching strangers study my work. One woman stood in front of it for a long time, then turned and smiled at me. "She looks brave," she said. "She is," I replied. Later that evening, as I was gathering my things, Mia approached me with a knowing smile. "Someone wants to buy it," she said, nodding toward my wall. "Offered full price, no questions asked." I blinked. "Seriously?" She nodded. Art born from pain always finds a home.
It speaks to people.
And that's when it hit me.
I had found my real family.
Not in the people who shared my blood, but in the ones who shared my broken pieces and helped me make something beautiful from them. People who didn't ask me to shrink, who didn't withhold love like a punishment, who didn't need me to perform to be worthy of their affection. People who stayed not because they had to, but because they chose to. In the weeks that followed, I started painting more boldly. I opened up. I laughed louder. I said no without guilt. I stopped trying to be palatable. And slowly, something unexpected began to happen. The silence from my old family became background noise. Not gone, not forgotten, but no longer relevant to the life I was building. So when my mother's name lit up on my phone again, this time on a quiet Wednesday morning in June, I didn't feel panic. I just felt ready. When the phone rang, I was sitting on the hardwood floor of my apartment, barefoot and paint smeared, sorting through canvases for the fall exhibit Mia had invited me to help curate. The sun was coming in warm through the windows, dust floating in the light like confetti, and for the first time in months, I had no plans to be anywhere but there. I almost didn't check the screen when I heard the buzz. I'd turned off notifications from almost everyone back home weeks ago, but I glanced and there it was. Her name, Denise Mercer.
No emoji. No pretense.
Just stark, full name formality, like a letter addressed to someone no longer loved. I sat still for a second. The kind of stillness that feels like it holds weight, like the world's breath catches and waits for you to exhale. I didn't want to answer it, but I also didn't want to flinch from it anymore. And I think that's what finally did it. I pressed accept, lifted the phone to my ear, and said, not softly, not nervously, just steadily, "Hi, Mom." Her voice came through instantly. No pause, no warm-up. "Hannah, thank God. I was starting to think something had happened to you." "I'm fine," I said, with no inflection. Not reassurance. Not anger.
Just a fact.
"I've called you 8 times. I've texted. You blocked your brother." She said this like she was reading from a list of my crimes.
I did. Still calm.
Still sitting in sunlight. There was a pause then, brief but charged. I could imagine her in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, arms crossed, one hip hitched like always when she wanted to appear relaxed but needed control. "We didn't raise you to be cruel," she said at last. I didn't laugh. I wanted to. Not because it was funny, it wasn't, but because of how rehearsed it all sounded. Like she had a catalog of lines to choose from and had decided cruel was the most damning one. "You didn't raise me to be anything," I said. "You raised Jason. I just happened to be there." Her breath caught. That was the first break in her voice, a microfracture. But she covered it quickly. "Don't be dramatic." "You called me selfish," I said. "You let them try to take my home. You forgot my birthday last year and gave your daughter-in-law my grandmother's necklace like I wasn't alive. But sure, let's call me dramatic." "You're twisting everything," she said. Still measured. Still like this was a court case and she was both judge and jury. "I'm not twisting it. I'm just remembering it out loud."
She went quiet.
And in that moment, for the first time since I was a child, I realized I was no longer afraid of her silence. I didn't need to fill it. I didn't need to earn my way back into her approval by shrinking or apologizing or over-explaining. I could just let the silence hang there like truth in a room. "Finally," she said, "your father's worried." I almost said, "He hasn't called." But I didn't want to score points. I wasn't playing anymore. "What do you want, Mom?" I asked. That made her falter again. She wasn't used to me asking direct questions. She was used to me dancing around her moods like they were weather systems I had to adapt to.
"We want to move on," she said at last.
"We want to fix this. But you need to stop making this so hard." I blinked. "Me? You still think I'm the one who broke this?" "You walked away." "I had to. You made me choose between myself and you." Her voice rose then, just a little. "That's not true." "Isn't it?" I asked. "Because when I said no, when I refused to be erased again, you didn't ask why. You just got angry." I was hurt. And I wasn't. That stopped her. "I'm not doing this to punish you," I said. "I'm doing this because it's the only way I know how to breathe without drowning. I needed space, and you tried to twist that into betrayal. You're still my daughter." I know, I said, but you haven't acted like my mother in a long time. The silence after that wasn't angry. It was heavy, maybe reflective, maybe not. I'll never know. All I know is that when she spoke again, her voice was lower. Well, I hope you'll think about coming to Aiden's birthday.
He asks about you.
That hurt in a way I didn't expect. Not because I believed her, I didn't, but because I wanted it to be true. I wanted to matter to someone in that house. Even a toddler. Even just in stories. I'll think about it, I said, not promising anything. But I won't come if it means pretending. I never asked you to pretend. Mom, I said, quiet but clear. That's all you've ever asked me to do. And then I hung up. Not angrily. Not theatrically. Just finally. I sat there for a long time. The silence in the apartment now my own, not hers. And slowly, as I listened to the faint sounds of the city beyond my window, I began to cry. Not the broken sobs of a woman abandoned, but the soft, relieved weeping of someone who finally laid down a weight she was never meant to carry. It felt like mourning and freedom all at once. Like I was saying goodbye to a version of myself I no longer needed to protect. The next day, I didn't return to the gallery right away. Instead, I went for a long walk around the city, the one I'd chosen for myself, not the one my parents pretended to know. I bought myself a bouquet of sunflowers from a vendor who didn't know my name and didn't need to. I sat on a park bench and sketched strangers for fun. I watched a little girl try to feed a pigeon her ice cream, and I smiled at her joy, so unguarded, so simple. That afternoon, I texted Mia. Thanks for making space for me. In every way. I didn't know what I was missing until you handed it to me with both hands. She replied almost instantly. You made your own space, Hannah. We just lit the door. Later that week, she offered me a part-time teaching spot at a weekend workshop for at-risk teens who'd been through trauma. They don't trust easy, she warned. But you don't either. So maybe you'll meet in the middle. And so I did. Week by week, I stood in front of kids who had lost far more than I had, but who saw themselves in the way I held a pencil or described the ache of being invisible. We didn't fix each other. That's not how healing works. But we gave each other mirrors, and sometimes that's more than enough. And that's how I knew I had made the right choice. That what they had called selfish was really self-preservation. That walking away wasn't betrayal, it was rebirth. It happened on a Thursday. I wasn't planning to go out that night. I had spent most of the day preparing for the workshop I'd be teaching over the weekend, running my hands through bins of charcoal and pastels, drafting lesson plans, and organizing supplies in little color-coded boxes that would probably be scrambled the moment the teens got to them. But I didn't mind. There was something healing about preparing for chaos, something grounding in knowing I was creating space for someone else to be fully themselves, without consequence. Mia had texted around 5. Meet us at Hollow Tree for open mic tonight. Lila's reading a new piece, and I'm dragging Simone whether she likes it or not. I stared at the message for a few minutes, weighing it. I was tired, but in that pleasant, productive way. I'd showered, but hadn't put on real clothes. I was still in soft cotton pants and a hoodie I'd stolen from Ben before we ended things. I was ready to decline. But something nudged me, a voice that didn't sound like fear or guilt, but something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or readiness. So I went. Hollow Tree was tucked on a quieter street just past the gallery, one of those low-lit, wood-paneled bars that always smelled like cinnamon and smoke, whether it was December or June. I'd been there twice before, both times with the group. It was the kind of place where the waitresses knew your name after a visit or two, and where the regulars always left a chair open at their table, just in case. I spotted Mia at the far end, waving from a booth with Lila beside her, holding what looked like a crumpled napkin covered in frantic handwriting. I waved back and started toward them. And that's when I saw him. Jason. He was at the bar, standing too confidently in a space that didn't belong to him, laughing at something the bartender said. His shirt was unbuttoned one extra notch, sleeves rolled up like he thought he was someone to watch. And flanking him, as always, was a woman. Not Kelsey. A brunette in a low-cut blouse, sipping something neon through a straw and staring at him like she'd never seen a red flag in her life. For a split second, I stopped breathing. Not from fear. From the sheer, surreal fact of seeing him there, outside of their house, outside of our shared past, just existing in the same air. I could have turned around. I could have walked away. But I didn't. I squared my shoulders and kept walking. Past him.
Past the history.
Past everything that once made me feel like a lesser star in his sky. I felt his eyes on me before I heard his voice. Hannah. I paused, halfway to Mia's table. I didn't turn. Not right away. I waited until I had control over the twitch in my lip, the thrum of my pulse. Then I faced him. Jason. He blinked, as if surprised I hadn't pretended not to hear him. As if I owed him that. Wow, he said, glancing down at my clothes, then back up at my face. Didn't expect to see you here. I could say the same. He chuckled, like we were siblings sharing a harmless joke, not two people who hadn't spoken in months. You look different. I raised an eyebrow. Better or worse? He hesitated. That was always his problem. He could lie, but he couldn't do it well. Just different. Behind him, the woman shifted, bored. I saw her glance at her phone. Jason noticed too and stepped closer, lowering his voice. Listen, I've been meaning to talk to you. Mom and Dad are really upset. They said you cut them off. I did. Why? I tilted my head. Do you really want to know? Or are you just here to make sure I'm still the villain in your version of things? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Come on, Han. It's not that serious. It was serious when you tried to take my apartment. It was serious when you all looked me in the eye and called me selfish for keeping the one thing I built on my own. That was a misunderstanding, he said quickly, glancing over his shoulder as if the room might turn on him. We thought you'd want to help. Help, or disappear again, so you could keep pretending I don't exist unless you need something. Now the smile dropped. Jesus, you're still holding on to that? I'm not holding on, I said calmly. I'm letting go. Every day. He didn't have a response for that. He just stared. I could see it in his eyes, the confusion, the disappointment, maybe even the embarrassment of realizing I wasn't playing the role anymore. I wasn't the quiet one. I wasn't the shadow. I was standing right there in front of him, in the light, unshaken. He looked me up and down again, slower this time. Not in judgment. In search of something. Familiarity. Maybe. Leverage. I gave him neither. You really think you're better than us now, he said, and it wasn't a question.
No, irrablia.
I think I'm finally better to myself. And that's enough. Mia called my name then and I turned. She held up a glass of wine and waved it like a lifeline. I smiled, raised a hand in thanks, and walked toward her. Behind me, Jason didn't follow. When I slid into the booth, Mia raised an eyebrow. You okay? I am now. Lila looked up from her napkin. You know him? Used to. And that was all I said. Later that night, as Lila read a piece about rebuilding after divorce and Simone wiped a stray tear with her sleeve, I felt something shift in me again. Not like a break, more like a release. I didn't need closure from Jason. I didn't need an apology. I had already given myself everything they refused to. On my walk home, the air was warm and still, and the street lamps cast long shadows across the sidewalk. I felt steady in my own skin, like I belonged to myself again, or maybe for the first time. And when I passed a florist that had closed for the night, I saw a single sunflower left on display in the window, its face turned stubbornly toward the glass. I smiled. The message came on a Sunday, not in the cold quiet of morning, and not in the dark hush of night either. It arrived at 3:17 in the afternoon, while I was sitting cross-legged on the floor of the gallery, helping a group of kids sketch their emotional maps, abstract expressions of who they were and how they got there. It was a prompt I designed after a particularly difficult week with one of the students, Marcus, who rarely spoke and never made eye contact, but had once drawn a jagged black spiral that made Mia take a deep breath and say, "He doesn't need words. He just needs room." I'd remembered that when I handed out paper that afternoon, saying softly, "There's no wrong way to be here." My phone buzzed as I was picking up scattered pastels from the floor, and I glanced at the screen out of habit, already halfway tuned out. But there it was. Her name again. Denise Mercer. I didn't open it right away. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and let the kids finish their maps, helped them tape them up to the cork wall, complimented their color choices and bravery, and handed out peanut butter crackers with little cups of orange juice. Only when the last child had left, when the gallery had grown quiet and sun-drenched in that slow Sunday kind of way, did I sit on the bench near the front window and finally read the message. "Hi, Hannah. I know you don't owe me anything. I know you're probably happier now without us in your life. I'm not writing to pull you back. I just wanted to say, I've been thinking about the kind of mother I was, and the kind of woman I expected you to be. I'm sorry I never made room for who you actually were. I'm sorry I only ever saw you through the lens of what I thought you should be. You don't have to respond. I just wanted you to know. That was all. No ask.
No but.
No blame disguised as concern. Just words." I sat there for a long time with the screen lit in my lap, watching the message fade to black as the phone timed out. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. I just breathed. A full breath from somewhere deep in my ribs, the kind I'd never taken in their house without holding something back. And in that breath, I understood something I'd been circling around for years. She had loved me, in the only language she knew. But it was a love built on control, on assumption, on fear. Fear that I'd drift too far from the version of daughter she knew how to parent. Fear that I'd stop needing her in the ways she felt confident being needed. And maybe, just maybe, fear that I'd find joy without her. Because if I could, what did that say about the years she'd spent clipping my wings? I didn't respond. Not right away. I let that silence be what it was, not punishment but space. And in that space, I gave myself permission to feel everything at once. The grief, the gratitude, the ache of lost years, and the relief of new ones ahead. I thought of Jason too, of the look on his face that night at Hollow Tree. He hadn't just seen me. He'd recognized what he'd never bothered to notice. And that recognition had scared him. Not because I was cruel or bitter or vindictive, but because I was no longer available for their narrative. I wasn't a background character anymore. I wasn't the one who bent or absorbed or disappeared for harmony. I was real and loud and full of choice. Later that week, I shared the message with Mia. She read it slowly, then looked at me and asked, "How do you feel?" "I think," I said carefully. "I'm glad she said it. But I don't need anything else." She nodded. Forgiveness isn't a key back in. Sometimes it's just the closing of a door you stopped walking through years ago. I smiled.
Exactly.
I didn't erase the message. I didn't frame it either. I let it live in my phone, quiet and still, like a stone at the bottom of a river. Heavy, maybe, but not drowning me anymore. 2 weeks later, at the fall gallery opening, one of my students, Marcus, pulled me aside and handed me a folded piece of paper. "I made this for you," he said, barely audible. Inside was a sketch of a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, her arms outstretched, hair wild in the wind. Behind her, a tangle of roots, thick, thorny, black. In front of her, light. Not sun exactly. Just space. Open.
Wide.
"She's not falling," he said, watching my face. "She's flying." I didn't have words, so I hugged him instead.
Tight. Long.
The kind of hug you give someone who's reminded you that the hardest things we carry can sometimes become the most beautiful. That night, I walked home alone beneath the early golden leaves of autumn, and I thought about the word family. How it had always meant duty to me. Obligation. Tension pressed between polite smiles. But now it meant something else. It meant Mia's steady belief. Marcus's quiet gift. Lila's chaos. Simone's laughter. The kids who'd trusted me with their stories. The woman in the mirror I'd finally learned to protect. And you know what? That family, the one I built from scratch, the one that asked for nothing but truth, it saved me in every way the old one never could. So if you've ever been told that walking away is selfish, that asking for respect is ungrateful, that choosing yourself is a betrayal, I want you to hear this. You don't owe anyone the slow death of your light. You're allowed to find your people. You're allowed to start over. You're allowed to choose love that doesn't hurt. And if this story found you when you needed it, if it helped you feel seen, or braver, or less alone, hit like. Leave a comment. Tell me where you're listening from. And thank you for being part of the family I didn't know I needed. Thank you for listening to my story.